It's Chris. Latest expansion, standalone, base game, starter, all in one from Marvel United and CMON. This is Spider-Geddon. Going into the Spider multiverse, we have several heroes that you may notice, several villains that you may or may not be familiar with, as well as several new mechanics. Why this may also be the best place to start if you're looking to get into Marvel United. Pros, cons, everything else in between, and a little bit of a short summary. Let's go. So in case you're not familiar with Marvel United, right? It's your basic cooperative. I take my individual spider hero in this case. I use my card-driven gameplay in order to take actions, one of potentially 3 on any given turn, represented by the typical iconography that go along with the original game, in order to defeat the villain. Slowly defeating thugs, rescuing civilians, and clearing threats from the various locations around the board as you traverse 6 locations, alternating between villain turns and hero turns. You win if you can defeat the bad guy. You lose, well, in a few more ways than that, including getting knocked out too many times, potentially, having special end victory conditions, or just running out of your individual hero decks. If you're not familiar, each hero has their own individual deck that they start with. So in this case, Superior Spider-Man. And in case you're not familiar, we have 3 different colors of figures on the board representing the 3 different levels of characters you can play. Villains are always in red. This is Spot. This is the special villain board that dictates his rules there, his tokens, and his special setup. In this case, we have Spider-Man Noir. Heroes are always represented by blue. And then you have your anti-heroes, or your, well, you could kind of go either way depending on the time and the moment and the situation. These are your purples. This game comes with 4 purples, 2 reds, and 6 blues. So you get to see exactly how this game unfolds. Now in this case, we're going up against Spot as the villain. So in this game, we have 3 of our heroes that we're utilizing, Superior Spider-Man being one of the ones that can go either way, Spider-Man Noir, and then we have Penny Parker, who rides this big spider bot as well. And so these are the 3 that we've decided to use in this game, and they get set up approximately across from the bad guy in the start setup. The game begins with you pulling a bad guy turn and then the good guy turn. On the bad guy turn, you pull a master plan card, and this tells you exactly what it does. It tells you how far to move the villain, whether or not they do their special ability, which is called a BAM, and then they lay down either thugs or civilians in their location and on either side. Each character from a villain standpoint also has a different BAM, and that's what this card addresses. Not only what happens when it BAMs, but then what happens if you can't place down any of those thugs or civilian icons, and then special rules that govern him in general. So in his case, it depends on how much health, as all villains do, depending on the player count. And then he actually has 3 special crisis tokens, which basically says if you do damage to him, instead you have to remove a crisis token, which is why he only has 3 health to begin with. So for example, the first master plan card here, move him to location with C-Spot token, bam there, and then drop these folks down. Now his special ability involves these little lettered spots A through F, and so you randomly distribute them out through the various locations here at the beginning of the game. And so you may or may not luck into this and say have him drop right next to you or right on top of you, depending on, your mileage. So in this case, we'll actually have Spot start over here and teleport where the heroes are to make this a little bit more of an explanation in case you're not familiar with how the game works. So in the beginning of the game, if you're a hero, you're drawing 3 cards. On your turn, you draw a 4th card. But in this case, since it's the villain's turn, you have 3 cards in your hand. The starting hand is actually available with some heroes here. And then actually with Superior Spider-Man, he actually has a card that actually says, if we get to this one, if we find it right here, the bottom of the deck too. And so you have to put this one on the bottom, everything else in between gets shuffled, you draw your 3 cards, you take a look at these cards, and these cards give you different actions that you can do. Your wilds do any of the 3, your stars rescue civilians, or they achieve the threats that are at each of these locations that you're trying to squash out pandemic style. You also have punching, and then the last icon here is going to be a move. Now these bottom generic icons are going to be available because as you play these cards, you then get to utilize the person's card in front of you when you lay yours down. So if Silk was the next one up here, then Silk lays her move, she gets to utilize Spider-Man's wild, and so on and so forth. But you'll also see that each character has a few individual special actions, in this case the Spider Bots and Spider Decoys, as well as Parker Industries here, that gives a combination of tokens that can be used at a later time for these abilities, or spider bots in this case, where he puts down these actual mini little spider bots into locations that allow him to manipulate them or act like he's there at a later point. So that's one of the unique mechanics that's done differently with the Spider-Man here, which stays very true to the comics if you're familiar with Superior Spider-Man at all from that side of things. But in this case, if we go back to the villain and we go back to the starting hand before I can play a card, let's say I have these 3 cards in my hand. So if I have to take a damage, how you take a damage in this game is you have to take one of these cards and then slide it to the bottom of your deck right there. And then that is how that goes. But if you run out of cards in your hand as damage, then you are KO'd. And then this over here tells you what happens if you get KO'd as well. If you get KO'd normally, the BAM goes off again. And so it's a cyclical pandemic-esque exploding nature, hence the BAM. And some of the villains will actually have special consequences if you get KO'd separately. Like, if we scroll through these, Moreland here actually has a special thing happen if you get KO'd. The bad guys at those locations, because some of these are threats, icons, or modifications to prevent the bad guy from getting defeated in the first place. Moreland actually gives his own bad guys or his own henchmen extra health. And in Moreland's case, as well as with Secret Spider-Man, they also have the changing of the game in the sense that if they get knocked out, you have the ability to pull in heroes that weren't in the game originally. Blessing and curse that is. So you go until you win or lose. But in order to actually even damage this guy in the first place, then you have to defeat enough thugs and enough civilians or enough threats. You have to have 2 of these 3 cards completed down here by taking them off of the board, either having 3 stars filled up there through the star action, or having enough civilians rescued from the spots or thugs defeated from the spots via the punching. All of them do 1 unless otherwise indicated. So when you get 1, though, the game escalates, and all of a sudden the villain goes every 2 player turns instead of every 3. At the start of the game, the villain goes once every 3 players. So villain A, B, C, villain D, A, B, villain B, C, D, if you had 4 people playing. But if you only had 2 people playing, villain A, B, A, villain BAB, villain, that sort of thing. So after 1 gets unlocked, it does that. After 2, you can actually start attacking, and after 3, you immediately draw a card. But that's where the cleverness of this game comes in, is if you don't time that correctly, all of a sudden the villain ramps up, escalates, and you're still going every 2, and you're not anywhere close to being able to damage him. So the mitigation there has to be present. And these decks are not big. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 cards. And you can make it less. If you want to make it more challenging, you can substitute out some of the cards. You can also, and this is the nice thing about this game, as opposed to some of the earlier editions of the core game, it gives you these battle plans, as well as it gives you weapons for your spider heroes in the first place. And it allows you to sub out cards in order to be able to utilize these to a different extent. And so Penny Parker has a couple. You've got a couple for the Spider-Man here as well. And so you get some options as well as the support, the battle plans that are just an additional layer of something more complex, something more strategic, but also to increase the difficulty that the first 2 seasons of Marvel United just don't have. And that works really well. Also, it gives you a little bit more variety with the villains here, because Superior Spider-Man actually has his own, if you're looking at the bottom of these cards here, these rescue civilians, clear threats, and defeat thugs. Well, look at these, look very familiar. It's because they're the exact same. But Superior Spider-Man has his own, and he actually tries to beat you by doing this. And if he does so, he wins in a different way, which again is just something clever and creative. Also, it has the supervillain mode if you want to do the 1 versus all, as well as the superhero mode to increase the difficulty if you want, as well, with a couple additional challenges. So this game has everything from season 1, everything from season 2, everything from the upcoming season 3 that has yet to actually hit backers of Marvel United Universe on crowdfunding recently. So that's the game in a nutshell. How does it compare? What are my thoughts on it? Well, I mean, Pro is, like I said, it's all encapsulating. And so if you want all of those different elements, you don't have to have 2 or 3 of the other expansions and mixing and matching and getting more from a game standpoint. Because if you only have one of the cores, you're going to have to buy one of those other expansions, and you may have to buy the separate battle plans or the separate battle weapons, and it may not fully correspond to the packs that you have already in terms of the boxes. And so getting all of this in a small frame is going to give you the best encapsulation of this game in a nutshell, of whether or not you want more elements, whether or not there's too many elements, or whether or not you even think they're necessary in the first place, so you can figure out, I don't have to buy a full pack later on in that sense at all. The other pro is there's a lot of variety just in this game. I mean, I have 4 available villains here that isn't really duplicated otherwise well in one box as a nutshell. And that's really, really good. I like the fact that they've incorporated also the special abilities. I mean, all of these characters actually feel distinctly different. That was the big problem with the whole season 1 and the whole original core box of Marvel United. They were all very generic. They all felt very samey because ultimately you still only have these 3 icons, well, 4, including the wilds here at the bottom. And so having some of these with the different text up here, more of them in these, and more ways to manipulate the board state without overly complicating it is rather nice. And to be fair, that was the other thing that I worry about this with this power creep. Is this one having power creep? No, it's not. I really like it. The villains are difficult. You know, anyone that says this game isn't challenging isn't playing it at the harder modes or isn't playing some of the harder villains in the first place. So don't be fooled by the, you know, cute appearance or the chibi aesthetic that they've got going on here. It belays the actual difficulty of this game in the first place and the variety that's offered now just in one box, let alone the expansion content that is overflowing and completely unnecessary, to be frank. Even I say that as an all-in Kickstarter backer of Multiverse in the first place. Cons in this game? Well, I mean, the fact that some of these spider powers seem specifically designed to counteract or to counter each other, whether it's on the villain side or the hero side, some of them just seem to either be significantly better against each other or significantly worse. And that's probably the biggest miss. And so you could definitely have that element if this is the only one that you own. But it's also going to give you the best taste, like I mentioned. And so from that aspect of things, if you're looking at this at all of going, should I get into Marvel United? Yes, this is going to be a higher price point to entry than, say, picking up a Marvel X-Men United on the secondary market or even at retail right now. No qualms about saying that. But it's going to give you all the elements that you may be looking for to know the true depth of this game. Because I would make the argument, too, if you picked up one of those other ones, you wouldn't quite know if the true depth is there. You might get the surface value. Is this going to be for me in general? But how much am I going to like it? This game is going to give you it much better from that aspect. And the other thing I didn't mention is that these locations are much better. These locations are head and shoulders above, more useful and more unique than the other ones in the first place. Move to any other location, face down equipment cards, which again, equipment cards, that's probably the mixed one right there. If you're not using the equipment cards, that one is basically worthless. And if you have it in that game, you just randomly pull and you don't pay attention, that's another downside. This one, drawing cards, is always helpful. And this one, if you have one or more in this location, you have to take a damage. So it's actually a bad thing. So I like the variety. I don't care that it's a negative consequence. It makes you, again, be more strategic. So all in all, am I happy with this? Yes. Will I say if you are a Marvel United junkie at this point or aficionado, do you need this one? I can't necessarily tell you that right now. Unless some of your favorite heroes are these Spider-Verse characters, I'd say wait until Marvel United Multiverse gets out and it makes the rounds more so that you can figure out if there's a better expansion or more suited to your personal tastes. It definitely quenches the thirst if you're like me and waiting for that at this point, because who knows when it's going to get here. But is it doing well from a standalone standpoint, and would you be happy with just having this if you knew nothing else? Yeah, I think you would be, pretty much. But again, I think that some of the characters just sort of either being great against each other or absolutely, you know, sort of a little bit of a miss if you choose just the exact wrong one. Just be aware of that and go into it and play it a second or third time, or play against a different villain or with different heroes if that happens to you, just so that's not your full experience with this one as a nutshell. So there you go. That is Marvel United Spider-Geddon. Pick it up at retail if you want. I got it off Amazon. So that's all I got to say. So there you go. Stay classy. Have a great freaking day. Thanks for watching. Peace out.